Good morning, everyone. Thank you. Thank you for all coming today. I'm David Otto. I am iCentire's Adelaide office representative, and I overlook the government and corporate relationships here in Adelaide. I'd like to start by acknowledging we're meeting today on the unceded and traditional lands of the Kaurna people. We pay our respect and their ongoing connection to this land. We pay our respects to the Kaurna elders past, present and emerging. Before we get started, just some housekeeping. Please take a moment to silence your mobiles. Restrooms are just located past the lift, just outside the door there if you need them. We will be recording today and sharing on our socials, so do note that. The panel will run through till 11:30 today, and then we'll have Q&A following, so please hold your questions to that time. And we will be out of this space by 12:30, so we encourage you though to continue the conversations following afterwards. We're here today to explore how trust and credibility are being reshaped across different information environments. Traditionally, communicators have managed stakeholders in the media, community, customers, investors. Today, AI has become invisible yet increasingly significant new stakeholder, and AI is shaping narratives, amplifying messages, critically interpreting sentiment at a scale that is hard for us to truly comprehend. Our session today is going to reframe AI from just a technology to an active participant in communications. And one that we must understand, manage and strategically engage with. iCentire, we've been running similar sessions and discussions like this today across Australia and APAC. And our goal today is to bring you together to learn from some of our leading voices and help us wrap our heads around what the challenges and the opportunities with AI. I'm very pleased to introduce our panel. Corey McLeod is a publisher and corporate strategic advisor with 25 years expertise across B2B and the tech industry. Corey is the publisher of Innovation Oz, an independent voice for Australian tech industry. She's the principal of Innovation Advisory and the director of the National Press Club.
Just one of the changes.
One of. Thank you, Corey. Eddie Major is a strategic communicator and advisor working at the intersection of AI, higher ed, and digital policy. With more than a decade of experience in media and public engagement, he's worked with educators, researchers, policymakers about the transformative potential of AI. Currently, he coordinates AI learning at Adelaide Uni and was previously comms manager at the Australian Institute of Machine Learning. Dr. Colette Snowden, senior lecturer at the School of Comms, Media and Journalism at Adelaide Uni. Dr. Snowden brings extensive experience in strategic communications with a specific focus on systemic effects of technology, organisational communications and societal structures. And to moderate today's discussion, I'm thrilled to introduce Nairi Crawford. Nairi leads our AI strategy at Pulsar Group, iCentire's parent company. And key to her role is helping communicators navigate the practical realities of AI and ensure they have actionable insights to confront the challenges and take advantage of the opportunities of AI. Thank you all today for coming and for your contribution to our discussion. I'll hand over to you, Nairi, to moderate today's panel.
Hi everyone, thank you for that. I think you got to see the fun challenge of me trying to navigate a Madonna mic this morning. That's going to be the highlight of my day, but we could not figure that out. It was upside down. I need some kind of an AI to actually put equipment on me, so that's good. It's lovely to have so many of you here today. It's really nice to have a room full of people. I obviously spend a lot of time talking to machines, so it's nice to see real faces. Today we're going to try and have a discussion that moves around a little bit. We'll try and tackle some tactical things. We'll try and tackle some much bigger questions about AI. But to start with, I thought it might be an interesting exercise, given that the title of this is AI as a stakeholder, for us to try and describe what AI is and what it would look like if it was in the room as like a real stakeholder. So I actually might start with you, Corey, of like, what are some of the things that, how would you describe AI if it was here with us today?
Hello. Hello. If it was here right now, it'd probably be sitting in the corner thinking, listening, transcribing, synthesizing. That would be the first thing. It would be listening to everything and turning out kind of dot points of the discussion today and helping us remember what happened because we've been engaged in the conversation, and will be reminding us what we may have forgotten while we were listening or maybe looking at something on our phones.
Mm-hmm. And doing it so politely.
It's so politely. Mm-hmm. And possibly a sycophant as well.
Everyone needs a sycophant.
Everyone needs a sycophant in their life.
What about you, Eddie?
Yeah, certainly all-seeing, not necessarily all-knowing, but not necessarily all-powerful, so maybe a bit omniscient, but not omnipotent in that regard. Mm-hmm. AI is not one thing, it's a whole basket of technologies. It's a whole spectrum of different areas of computer science that have really converged in the last few years with what people call frontier AI, so that's your transformer-based technology behind, there's a literal T in ChatGPT, so that's where most of the interest is happening right now, but its ability to absorb vast quantities of information is hard for our little human brains to understand.
I think if AI was a stakeholder, it's an overconfident one that thinks it knows how to do your job without knowing exactly what you do or how you do it. And it doesn't have much knowledge of the nuances of local conditions and culture or of what time and resources you have available. And it's almost certainly a mansplainer.
Right, so we've got a mansplaining sycophant, ill-defined, but really wants to help. And so in the corner. Not mansplainer is not known for sitting in the corner, but it's an interesting one. So I think maybe let's move to Edie. You talk about AI a lot, obviously, and it's often framed as this productivity tool that helps us write faster or work more efficiently. Do you see it as something much bigger than that? And you've alluded to it just in your answer did before, but how do you think AI is actually changing the role of communication? It's just a really light question to start you off.
Yeah, I think if you'd asked me that maybe 3 years ago when we had that the first couple of versions of ChatGPT, it's that you can see the potential there. It can help in writing things, but when you get these generic, press releases, media releases, those sorts of things, anyone who's a skilled communicator or someone who's got those literacy skills can see the quality of problems there. And so it was very, very easy, I think, in those early days to go, oh yeah, right, this is it's like Mr. Clippy from what? Yeah, all right. But I've been working in AI probably 12 months before ChatGPT arrived and blew it all up and made it, this huge story that it is today. And so that 12 months was peaceful, but also because no one else was talking about it until ChatGPT came along. And then it was a fascinating 12 months kind of as an apprenticeship or a journeyman or whatever, just to absorb this. And then right when ChatGPT arrived, I'd already sort of come to the conclusion, this is interesting, it's huge. What we're seeing now with frontier AI, so your basket of tools from all the main tech companies, is significantly more powerful in terms of its ability to engage in really complex tasks that are difficult for us to understand. So there's one AI safety research company called Meta Model Evaluation Threat Research, METR, And their way of measuring AI capability is not in these obscure things like the model size in terms of parameters, or they talk about the hardware compute and measured in gigawatts. These things don't mean much to people like us. They're really good communicators. So they measure AI capability and they chart it exponentially by the degree of success completing tasks and how long it would take for a person to do the same task. So about a year ago, it was several minutes worth of coding. Now we're talking about tasks that would take a person probably 2 days to do. And the graph is just doing this. Where that goes from now, I mean, exponential is not guaranteed, and there's a huge range of uncertainties for where it's going next that was going to determine where that goes. So in terms of how it's changing communication, to actually answer the question, professional communication, whether it's internal communication in an organisation, communicating externally, is whatever is happening behind the scenes. We've focused too much on output. So in my case at the university, everyone's still very focused on students using or misusing AI in their essays and cheating in assignments and stuff. That's visible. That's output from a person. And again, the quality of, can I use this to produce my work, answer my emails, or do those sorts of things. But it's probably helpful to focus more on the input layer, which is how much information can I throw at this? Can it read thousands and thousands of pages of reports or legislation or meeting notes and transcripts, and can it help me find the needle in the haystack? That's where the transformation's, I think, more interesting, because it's less visible until you start getting in there and having a look and doing it yourself. But again, the main point is whatever's happening behind the scenes, it's totally rewiring the information ecosystem that we've had for the last 25 years. It's very, very difficult to build sustainable communication, particularly if you're in publishing industry, for example, in the internet age. Those who have done so successfully through a lot of hard work, all the rules have changed. It's completely different now.
I think I might pick up on, you mentioned publishing. Corey, you have two hats in this conversation a little bit, both as more of a communications practitioner, but also as a publisher.
Yep.
And what does it look like for you in terms of the impact that AI has on both those sides of the fence?
So I'll start with the publishing side, and this is not anywhere near as sophisticated an answer as Eddie gave, but I'd encourage the comms professionals to I think of this song all the time, mental as anything, the nips are getting bigger. So basically, the amount of words are really cheap these days, and the amount of words being flung at publishers is spectacular. And I'm going to say, even in the past 2 months, the words, there are so many of them, and they're very cheap and they expand. So 700 words for an op-ed are now 1,200, or pictures are now 600 words. So it's kind of boring and it's very obvious and whatnot. But my one piece of advice from a publishing perspective is, we've got enough words to read. There's too many words. So really thinking about, who am I talking to? Why do they care? Stripping out all the language. That's one thing that AI, if they were sitting in this room, they're very verbose. And they tend to kind of draw on things we already know. And we work in a news business. Those things are not on public record already. So if you're trying to point to news for a news publication, think about what's not already there. And if you're trying to take something that's new and put it through some sort of AI, you're just going to poo in the pool, unfortunately. It's not a very final point to put on it. So really trust your gut that you're a person talking to a person. It will stick out from the hundreds of emails that have been AI generated in the inbox of the journalists. So that's one. On the comm side, I'd like to think that it's almost the same, and I think we've only got a couple of clients on advisory clients, but they're really looking to us for information about what's going on in the world that is new to them, not synthesizing things that are already on public record. And I would say, just as a kind of, if you think about where news sources are, or where LLMs are taking their information from, often they're coming from advocacy sites and lots of things that are intentionally in the public sphere. And the news and the reporting is often behind paywalls. It's not as easily surfaceable in LLMs. So what you're getting is often things that they're there because someone has an agenda to promote that. I'll just give you one quick example. There is a large multinational that spends a lot of money on plushies and soft toys for their high-rise offices in Sydney. Now, they have managed to perpetuate their investment figure in Australia over the past 2 or 3 years. Now, they have done that so effectively through LLMs that it's now that investment figure that may be about R&D, but it's more likely the cost of the plushies in their office, is now repeated in minister speeches.
Yeah.
So that is not news or insight or verified information. That is very effectively using an LLM to have something that is massaged into now being factual and repeated by our government. So just that's from where we sit. You got to now look at everything and go, hang on a minute, where did that come from?
Yeah, I don't know how many people in the room would be familiar with some of the research that comes out about GEO and the sources that actually influence AI models and LLMs particularly. But there's a lot of international research that does overweight the role of editorial media. So particularly, we have an LLM reputational tool called AOView that we've done quite deliberately to look at reputation and citation analysis so that we could get an understanding of what it looks like in this part of the world. And it is really different because of the copyright restrictions and the paywall nature of media content. So it is something worth considering what the definition of news is in that environment. And I think possibly my favourite quote from Corey in the discussions that we've had is that news should be new.
Also, just quickly, in the press gallery, so we have a bureau in the press gallery. When you're thinking about those journalists and what they're doing, they're not using AI. They are talking to people. We're not this is not this conversation, but as it gets further down in sort of the tiers of publications, AI is playing an increasing role, and a lot of it's about volume. But if you're thinking about what those core press gallery journalists are doing, as an example, they're out talking to people and doing the shoe leather type of roles. They're obviously, their bureaus are trying to get them to look at AI from a productivity perspective. But as kind of journalists, they're actually just doing what they've always done and talking to people and discovering new things.
Okay, so Colette, you have studied a number of kind of technological changes and its impact on communication. AI is often described as almost coming out of nowhere, and I think as Eddie alluded to, it's not quite the case. How do you think this framing of it being brand new helps or maybe mislead us a little bit in terms of communicators?
Well, I think it misleads people, and especially people in this room. Everyone has either grown up or lived through the digital revolution, and many of you have seen your work and your careers evolve in line with the technology. And that's a historical pattern that's been going on for about thousands of years. So AI is the actual hardware is really a development of the kinds of technology that even the ancient Greeks were trying to develop with automatic machines. And AI itself has been a project that's about 70 years in development. And some of it we already know, but we don't think about it as AI. So what's a synthesizer? What is the synthesizer? The computerization of music. But the taking of knowledge about music and putting it into a machine form. So we're already familiar with it. So one of the important things, I think, is to not be intimidated by it, but to do what all good communication professionals always do, is find out about it. And to picking up Corey's point, information is not communication. And so the fundamental processes of communication, especially when we think about connecting with stakeholders, still apply. So whether you are getting, using data, and, Accenture's got some fantastic tools that people should really be making more use of, to give management information so that they can do better strategic communication. But one of the things that I think as a profession we have to deal with is that people tend to think that content is communication, and that when technology comes along, people use it to, or management in particular, use it to reduce the time available you have to actually do real communication, planning, discussing, arguing and advocating. So I would say that one of the important things you have to do in parallel with learning about how AI can help you in whatever role you have is to be a vocal advocate for the traditional role of communication in your organisation, and that AI is there to enhance it, not to replace it.
Can I add to that? I think one of the things, like to your point, Colette, is what I see is missing, and maybe to your point about the role that AI can play and that you as communications experts can help the organisation, is make sure that you don't lose the empathy gene. So the empathy is everything. If you're a communications person, you're thinking, what does this person need to know? What does this community need to know? How can I make sure that I can help, and via the journalist who is empathetic with them and what their tasks and days look like, and that you're the chief custodian of being the chief empathizer of the organisation and the people that you're managing relationships with, and then the AI becomes a tool to help you be more empathetic, because at the moment the opposite is happening. So I just think that empathy word is so top of mind for me across publishing and comms that we're losing it, and if we get it back, I think it'll be magic.
Yeah, I think empathy is a great point and descriptor. I think it's also trying to find a balance between being too protectionist over something like empathy. There is a way to, I think, use a level of support and technology to get to a draft form, to get to a 60% version. It's making sure that you don't forget to add in the value over the top, I think, is the other thing. I think one of the challenges I often hear is people not wanting to write press releases with an AI, not wanting to write. We can get very weighed down by wanting to protect those tasks, but trying to find that balance, I think, is important.
Of course. I think the other thing is using AI to surface things on things that are already written often comes from marketing type thinking. One thing that we've found works really well across both parts of the business is the spoken word. There is a natural authenticity that comes with that. So if you're speaking something and then that's being surfaced up, it has a way of cutting through a lot of the stuff that's being put into it, which may have come from more generic sources, and it also captures some of that local flavour that we can potentially lose. So the spoken word is where we really use it. So I can do, verbal descriptions of, say, what's happened to this today. So they're helping quickly translate that. But it's also, I think, goes quite well in geo because it's natural.
Should I ask how you feel about AI voice?
In terms of
how do you feel about AI
talking to
synthesized voice, or having the potential for a CEO statement to be sliced together from previous statements?
Oh, I think that's not what I'm talking about here. I'm more talking about what goes in as an input from voice, as opposed to getting into that sort of splicing together.
What I think one of the things about that is, and thinking about stakeholders, what we already know about the way people respond and react to AI-generated information and content is that if they find out that it's AI and it wasn't clear to them, they're very likely to dismiss it and reject it, not on any logical grounds, but on the grounds of empathy, is that they thought that someone was talking directly to them or giving them or listening to them. But to find, it's probably an example of that would be, I don't know, if you've ever rung someone up and you hear their voice and it's a voice you're familiar with, and you start talking to them, and then you realise you're talking to their voicemail. It's the same kind of emotional reaction, and we have to also remember that part of all communication is the receiver has a response, and whether it's AI generated or generated organically, thinking about how stakeholders are going to respond to that information is so important still.
Just on the voice thing, and just really interesting point. Synthetic voices through current AI tools are now really, really, really good. You can have a great conversation, and then the amount of nuance and contextual understanding is better than ever before. Also, the latest version of Google Gemini has got really good live translation to a variety of languages, so you can do the tourist thing and have conversations with your earbuds in, and it's really, really impressive. But it's also not new. So if you remember Dragon naturally speaking from like the 90s or whenever that was, and then in certain industries and areas, medical practice, they do a lot of transcription. Legal would be another one. But for each and every one of us, when we go back to our offices, we're all going to use keyboards, right? Keyboards are 170 years old. So the QWERTY keyboard is 170 years old, and it's still the primary input peripheral for when we want to get some text happening or communicate. And it's not due to technology, it's due to human factors. And if you don't understand those factors when you're deciding to use other communication technology types like synthetic voices, people want to do synthetic avatars for training videos, all that kind of stuff. If you're not considering those human factors, you run the risk of just falling flat. A great example is Mark Zuckerberg with the metaverse stuff. He spent like $70 billion. What a lark, yeah. People don't want to go about their lives with the goggles on their face. It's fun for like a party. It's like 10-pin bowling. Like, you'll do it. And that was amazing, and we'll never do that again unless you're, it's a gimmick. It's not something that we're going to take on board. The technology, the interface isn't quite there. So the AI technology and the content side of things is certainly racing ahead. But until someone cracks the new interface, and when they do, it'll be some, I don't know, brain implant or whatever, then it'll change everything. But until that happens, that's what's holding things back, I think.
Good point. I think we've talked about transparency and empathy and authenticity of it. So I think responsibility is another natural place for us to look at. So Eddie, for you, and in your opinion, when an organisation, and a lot of organisations do seem to be still figuring out where responsibility for AI sits, is this like a technology conversation? Is it a governance conversation? Or is it kind of communications and leadership, or everything in the room all at once?
Yeah, all of them at once. And that's what makes it so hard. In any large organisation, you go to the board, your C-suite, and then they have pillars that silo off into various areas. So if it's run from IT, because people think of AI as being just another technology, like the next version of Office or something like that, I don't know. All of a sudden you're running into problems from governance perspective, because if you're using AI in operational decision making, if you work for a state government department or you work for a public university, for example, you've got administrative decision making requirements, so you've got to speak to legal and risk, and it goes on and on and on. And then you realize that AI is really a cross-cutting technology, and it cuts across your organizational chart. It doesn't go down through one particular chief information officer or just chief data officer going from there. So in terms of the governance and strategy side of things, up until about late 2023, it was still sort of the Wild West, and we're now seeing the emergence of things like ISO 42001 as the international standard for AI management system in an organizational adoption context. And then that's reflected in things like the government's AI guidance for AI adoption, federal government's guidance for AI adoption. So that's your foundations there, but it does require different ways of thinking and doing at the top level, and that can be tricky.
Yeah, and remember, communication is the management function, and managing AI, I think, falls into communication because of the connection with all the stakeholders of an organisation. And if you think about, if we look historically at some of the ways that it was badly managed, if we look at, say, two companies that ignored the digital revolution and said, no, we're well established in the market. We've been here for decades, Polaroid and Kodak, and they didn't pay attention to what was happening around them. Their management didn't respond, didn't see what was happening as a threat to their fundamental business and adapt, and they made themselves extinct. And if someone inside of those corporations had been a better advocate for the technology, they could have taken their brand and run with it. And so don't leave what is happening in AI to the IT department. You have to have a seat at the table and be advocating on behalf of stakeholders who you want to communicate with, because whether it looks technical or whether it looks human, whether what the style of it is like, how it's connected, where resources are directed, is all a management decision. It's not a technical decision.
Going on from that Kodak example, the story gets better when you remember that Kodak invented the technology that destroyed it. They invented the charge-coupled device as an imaging sensor. The first digital camera was like the size of a mini fridge or something. And they go, oh, wow, let's put that in the archives and never speak about it again. So obviously Kodak's chief business has been through film as a consumable, or camera film. And then likewise, Google invented the T in ChatGPT. They invented the transformer architecture. Google had its huge search dominance, and they're like, well, if this comes in the place of search, it's going to challenge our search business. And up until about a year ago, 59% of its revenue came from its oldest commercial product, Google Search, the blue text ads, like that we used to buy like 15 years ago or whatever. So they sort of dropped the ball on that one, so much that a startup, ChatGPT, OpenAI, got a huge dominance with ChatGPT. Google's finally catching up now, and the overviews in search are self-cannibalizing their search revenue for now. They realize what they have to do, but they slept on it for a few years.
I think just to pick up on that responsibility element, Corey, it would be good to get your perspective on, you were mentioning before on how a lot of information about organizations comes from AI and the way to seed information in there. Ultimately, when AI gets it wrong, who's responsible for it?
We've probably got a really kind of, in many ways, 1.0 sort of business from a publishing perspective. Like as a publisher, I guess I am responsible that accurate, fair, reasonable things get published and that they're true. So on one hand, because we are looking for factual new information, the sources are usually quite specific. So that makes it easier. Like, what report did that come from? Who said that? Is the quote accurate? One of the things that's probably a bigger challenge is transcribed quotes. There was one yesterday at AdStar, and it was terrible background, and I got the copy of the recording to share with the editorial team, but I looked at the quotes in writing going, oh, is it exactly word for word? Like, that would be a problem. Because did the Chief of Defence actually say that? And one word can actually make a difference. So for us, it's quite straightforward that it's the editor's job to go, where did it come from? Is it reported accurately, fairly? So we don't have I think sort of, Colette and Eddie talked more broadly about what organisations are dealing with. For us, it's really, can you hand on heart publish that and know where it's come from and that it's accurate and fair?
Okay, so that probably segues well into, there's an element with conversations about AI and LLMs particularly that sometimes feel like they're really about critical thinking more than anything else, and like AI literacy, for lack of a better term. Colette, you obviously work in this space of question asking. How, and we all tend to focus on AI's ability to generate answers.
Yeah.
How important is being able to ask a good question?
I think it's become even more important with AI, because the question that you ask determines what information you get, and the adage garbage in, garbage out is more applicable now. If you ask a superficial question, you'll get superficial answers. If you are not precise enough in explaining what it is you want to know, you're not going to get precise answers. And asking questions is a skill. There are a whole lot of other professions. Journalism is basically built on asking questions, and often asking questions that people think that you might not know to ask. Doctors, lawyers, counsellors, social workers, it's all about asking questions. But we have, for the last 50, 60 years, very much in the digital era, focused on producing streams of content without thinking about without thinking enough about what the stakeholders want. And I'm sure that most of you would have had this experience where you've used a help function for something, like, tell me, I want to know how to use something in Excel, and it asks you at the end, was this helpful? And a lot of the time I go, no, you didn't answer the question that I asked. But also you have to learn how to frame your questions in a way that you will get useful information. And quite a lot of the time what I see, especially in students' work, is because they have asked a question, because they don't have the foundational knowledge to know that the answer isn't exactly right, and they give it to us as, this is the answer to the question. The problem was that the question was wrong. It was based on their still forming knowledge. So yes, being able to reframe and reframe questions when you're using AI will have a powerful impact on what it produces.
You mentioned your students, and obviously you are actively teaching future communicators. How do they approach AI, or is there anything outside of that question discipline? What are some of the things that you think are concerning, or think that are potentially something we can learn from, and how those students?
Well, it's the same with all the existing technology. There's often an assumption that young people are all love technology. They don't. We all fall into a spectrum from early adopters to resistors, and so do they. But generally, and this is true for probably a lot of your own stakeholders, whether they're internal or external, is we tend to have a shallow exposure to the technology. So they're only using one of the AI engines that they could use, and that means they're getting that specific company's view of the world.
Mm-hmm.
And so you need to look at different tools. The other problem, and if you heard the news this morning about the NAPLAN results, is the general level of literacy in the community is falling over time because people read less. And so their capacity to comprehend information is also declining. And that is should be more of a public concern than the use of AI by itself.
Can I add here?
Yeah.
Just to your point, Colette, I was in the US last year and I went to a publishing conference, and I laughed because we'd say, they're like, where are you from? And I'd say Australia, and they'd literally turn on the heel and walk away. They're like, you're nothing to me. Not enough numbers. Like, it's a massive numbers game over there, and everybody's trying to find commercialising their different news sites and publications, and Australia is just not interesting to them. So that was a bit of a wake-up. But at that point, all of the big publishers were all doing deals with the different AIs, and it was literally a do-si-do. So they would have these publisher roundtables where people could speak openly and the vendors weren't in the room, and it was like, well, who's done a deal with who? But if you think about, you're ingesting all of the Guardian as an example versus all of the News Limited content, you had a very different view of the world baked into that product. So at that point, everybody was very conscious that the tap would be turned off when the AI companies had what they needed, and of course you got to keep it fresh, etc. But they knew that the next thing they were moving on to was images and video. So the top line, which is quite interesting, is one, which, exactly to Colette's point, which product are you using and what view of the world are you likely to get? And secondly, from a broader publishing perspective, how are people commercialising what they have and their relationships with audiences? And a great example is a lot of the community papers, which are very hard to commercialise. We see it here, but they're incredibly valuable for the LLMs because, who won the NRL championship of 1968 has come from a community newspaper. So getting that hyper-local reporting, which is hard to commercialise just from a, your standard publishing models, but very valuable for LLMs. So maybe that just gives a bit of a picture of how that sort of dance between the two was taking place a year ago, and it would be entirely different this year.
How does that play out for you about an immediate organisational transformation? Do you see that same reliance on obviously individual tools and systems? Are you coming across preferences or skill gaps, anything like that?
Yeah, certainly. I think when I swapped, I was previously at the Machine Learning Institute, 100% AI, 110% of the time. And then I walked across a road to another building when I changed jobs, still on the same campus, and then a very different environment, just to remind me of where, the rest of reality is at and, everyone else is. And so I guess a key thing that I notice now is a lot of the conversation is definitely comfortably settled around like a circa 2023 chat GPT. It's a chat bot. I can ask it questions. It can help me write emails and that's, all very well and good. And then you're seeing people who are working in tech and have got really advanced multi-agent systems up and running that as part of their small startup teams or even just individual developers and engineers. I was just getting my head around agentic AI as AI agents, as in like maybe one at a time, and CSIRO is now just working on governance for multi-agent systems. So it's not just how we interact with a highly automated, autonomous tool or workflow, but how they're operating amongst each other. And I just had to have a lay down or something. It was just too much. I'll get around to it eventually. So in terms of within the organisation, similar things as before is just the need to build literacy and build clarity where you can and get comfortable with uncertainty, because where we are now in this crazy AI era, it's kind of like the 90s when you had multiple browsers and multiple search engines. And remember then there was Alta Vista and Yahoo and Ask Jeeves and all the rest. Whereas in more recent times, you talked about SEO, it was just Google. So we've gone through a period prior to AI where things were stable, the brands were stable. You had Apple, you had PC, maybe Android, and that was about it, Google. Whereas now it's much more fractured. You said before about certain model developers will have certain views about the world. They also have different performance when it comes to how they reference content in live search when they're giving you answers, which from a communications perspective means it'll be volatile and you have to be flexible for, I think, another couple of years.
Yeah, there is a tendency to maybe train for one outcome. So you end up showing up well somewhere, but not everywhere else.
Yeah, and we also have to think about who controls the technology. So in every cycle of technology development, there comes a point where there's this, it starts off with a prototype and then it's introduced and there's an investment battle. But then there's this period at which I think we're in at the moment, which is the suppression of radical potential, as the existing companies battle for control, not so much of the audiences, but the standards that are going to be used, that are determined by mostly the International Telecommunications Union, and other industry bodies, but also the financial sector. So all of these things come into play, and I guess getting control of it within your own organisation is the best you can do. So, for example, American spelling, that the American companies that dominate mean that all of the content that we're seeing, that I'm seeing from my students, it's dominated by American spelling. Now, that maybe it doesn't matter, but maybe it does. But we also see the examples that people give are mainly American. They're not even European. So when people cite a case study, it's not an Australian one. And that's why I think it's very important to work locally with companies that do understand your stakeholders, your business, and the environment that you operate in.
I need to pick up on that local point before I sort of ask my final questions, and then turn the panel over to all of you to ask some questions. Eddie, South Australia has been quietly ahead on AI for many years, and probably in a lot of ways that people don't necessarily realise. What's the story for this room to know about, particularly how the state has approached it?
Yeah, so South Australia politically has supported AI research and development well before it was popular or even sort of known. And people are surprised to hear anecdotes of things that they've probably seen and not realised it was South Australian. I was talking to you a while ago about the Elvis movie with it got nominated for a bunch of Oscars and won nothing. And yeah, Austin, but yeah, as Elvis, and then his faces as Elvis and all the special effects for that were developed here at the Machine Learning Institute in Rising Sun Pictures, and they do all of the faces. It's a computer vision deep faking technique, which is part of a really complex workflow, and it's not necessarily better than what the real VFX artists do manually, but it's higher quality and probably takes less time. So it's competitive internationally, and show business is business, so you've got to be competitive in business. So as a result, like hundreds of millions of people have seen South Australian AI innovation without realising it, and they don't need to, and that's probably happening in a number of different areas. So what's the message from that is like, well, we're not competing on the same scale of general purpose AI. We're not going to have an OpenAI or an Anthropic emerge here. The startup unicorns are not. This is not where they're going to happen. But AI is highly scalable, so you can start small and go incrementally larger. So whether it's doing AI projects yourself as part of your organization, the hardware is now rentable from the cloud. So I think it's the talent is here, the support is here from senior stakeholders, the capability is here, and we're not as large as other economies, but thankfully AI is highly scalable, so you can pick your appetite and go from there.
Okay, so my final question to all of you, I like to try and end these discussions positively. Sometimes they don't feel super positive. But I think I would love to know from each of you, looking ahead, maybe 3 years' time, what's one of the assumptions that we've made about AI that we might realise is wrong? And as well as the 3 years ahead, I'm going to do a double barrel question. What do you want everyone in this room to take away today that they can change tomorrow? I'll start with you.
First of all, words are not always your friends. Fewer words, please. Just really cutting back the volume of words and going back to the empathy piece we talked about. One thing I think, I don't know if it's, how can you do your job better that is genuinely better? And we talk a lot about productivity and doing things faster. What are you doing as comms people that is actually compensating for the technology? Are you out talking to people, meeting people, doing real life things? What is the time saving doing? And where are you deploying that time in a way that makes you more human, more relatable, more connected? That you're using the AI to produce better, more authentic outcomes, and you're spending the productivity gains out there in the world connecting with people in real life. So that would be one thing. One of the things, this is probably going back a little bit to Colette's point about the way technology companies operate, a little bit of a concern about that right now we're all living through this gateway drug period, and we're going to turn around and go, oh, wow, that's really expensive. But all of our operations are built around the dependency, and are we equipped to operate in a non-AI environment? And that would be one thing I'd be thinking about in 3 years' time. If it was suddenly taken away or too expensive, how would we operate?
So there's a lot of talk about the AI jobs apocalypse or whatever. And I'm not convinced that we're going to see AI alone removing entire jobs or entire industries. It is certainly changing and displacing very rapidly various tasks. And what is a job if not for a suite of tasks that we perform throughout a day, sometimes well, sometimes poorly? Best example of that is Geoffrey Hinton, machine learning extraordinaire, Nobel Prize laureate, said that computer vision will make radiologists extinct. It hasn't. There's more radiologists than ever before because he fundamentally misunderstood clinical practice because he's not that kind of doctor. Just think of that. However, you said, what are we going to see in 3 years' time? This is different from the internet. It's bigger. It's changing a lot. I think we're overdue for a big recession globally. Only part of that is due to AI. It's just going to happen. But just like in the .com bust, wiped out all the pretenders and all the over-indexed hypesters. That'll happen here too, but AI will continue happening. The technology is not going to slow down. So what do you take away from this? Start small, spend 20 minutes a day, 30 minutes a day reading, experimenting and tinkering. It seems really intimidating and it seems really crazy. That's not because you're new to this. It really is just intimidating and crazy for everyone. You'll get used to it and then just start seeing where it sits in your job, in your life and in your community, in your organization, and start incrementally, because it's going to impact you whether you like it or not. And you don't have to love AI, but you need to understand it better if you want to hate it more articulately.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with Eddie's last point. And it's, you have to lead. You can't follow the evolution of this technology. As communicators, you have to lead. And by that, I also mean being aware of what's coming means you're better armed to deal with it. But we also have to see that so much of what is being produced is homogenous and average. You know, the AI deviates towards the mean in what it delivers. So creativity actually becomes much more important. And lots of organisations have invested over decades in developing their brand identity, in investing in their own style, their own voice, their own tone of communication. You don't want to lose that. And the only way that you can salvage it is being familiar with it and developing the kinds of editing skills that you need to take what AI can produce really quickly and promptly, and then work with it creatively to produce empathy and authenticity, and to make sure that your stakeholders still believe that you are connecting with them, because that's what communication is essentially about. It's about connection. And if you lose the capacity to connect with your stakeholders, it doesn't matter what technology you're using.
I mean, I could ask like 4,000 more questions, but I won't. I would love to turn it over to all of you for questions. Dave is going to come grab my microphone so that we can get some good questions going. But please stick your hand up if you've got anything for this wonderful panel.
Yeah.
Hi there. I'm Tracy. I just wanted to ask, in terms of generative AI in search engines, I think there's been a little bit of law change recently with Google, where essentially it's generation where it's reading from social media and everything like that. It's now spewing things out as almost like pseudo facts. And that has changed in the US. Do we see Australia possibly following that in terms of making generative AI searches responsible for the information that they're pushing out? Eddie, I think you know exactly what I mean.
Yeah, so the background to that is that search engines and carriers traditionally have not been held liable for republishing content that comes through the search business. So Google isn't liable for reporting the news that comes from a bunch of news sites or gossip sites or what have you. You go after the actual source of the misinformation. However, that with the search overviews at the top, there's been a ruling that actually now Google is the publisher because it's drawn on a range of sources and then its AI model has then published that itself. So that's the key breakthrough there, and people have talked about it. I think it'll probably apply more in the EU first, they're a bit more regulated. As to what we've got here in Australia, I might throw over to the publishing expert.
I actually, In terms of the minutiae, not that that is a minutiae thing, but in terms of those specific things, I think the Australian government has more indicated the role it sees itself playing as opposed to specific rulings. I think it is looking very closely at what Europe is doing, and they've recently, the Prime Minister announced there's going to be, a unit for AI in the PMO. So I think right now there's lots of signalling as opposed to decisions that they're taking as a priority focus area. They're putting it in the Prime Minister's department, and also I think Australia across every sector has always known it to be quite heavily regulated, whether it's financial services or healthcare, etc. And I think they're taking the approach that they will do the same with AI. I think there's been some shuffles and some false starts, etc., with exactly how that's done, with a change in sort of ministerial, oversight, etc. So watch the space, and I think it's only quite recent that they're taking this sort of very bold, we will treat this holistically view.
Yeah. Remember that law always follows the technology. So that's something that you need to keep track of, what legal actions are being taken. So, for example, I saw the other day that someone is suing a wellness site because a member of their family followed their advice rather than in treating their cancer and ended up dying, with the argument that they have to take responsibility for that information that was provided. So until you get those legal precedent cases, we don't really know what direction the regulation will go in.
We've already got regulation here in South Australia for generative image-based content in political campaigns and also for image-based abuse. And there's a news item about some staff from the Courts Admin Authority allegedly doctoring images of a journalist. It was a very exciting story in the paper a couple of days ago. For text-based stuff specifically, or I'm not really sure, I haven't seen anything. It'll come under ACMA, I guess, eventually.
Sorry. I just had a question in regards to referencing AI in comms that goes out, and at what point you should do that. If you've used it to assist you write the communications, but it's just used as a resource and you've typed the word yourself, I guess, or at that point should you reference it, or is it 50% of the work? In terms of credibility, I feel like it's lost if you.
I would like to think, I don't think there is rules on this. I'd like to think that the editing process is so good that whatever has been put together is so indistinguishable that it's a moot point. I will say there was a contributed piece by someone from Western Sydney University that went about AI that was published was it the Sydney Morning Herald?
Yeah.
It was a Nine outlet, and then they sort of found out later that it had been AI assisted, and that wasn't declared, and then they removed it, which created. I mean, if they didn't know and if the quality of the work was such that they felt that it would be published on its own merits, to make that decision shows exactly how much of a grey area it is, because the quality was not looking like it was AI slop. They were happy to take it, and to your point, was it? It was mapped out as a concept with AI, or was it 90% written with AI? I don't think there's an answer. I think it's a very live issue right now. We have a lot of this in the university, and there's obviously a different example for students in assessment, particularly in first year, where we want them to demonstrate. It's mostly about demonstrating their learning rather than focusing on an undergraduate first year essay is not going to be winning any prizes anytime soon. That's not the point of it. But then when you get out into sort of the real world, there's some different areas. Are you in government, or are you in a private organisation? What sort of business are you in? Oh, right, okay. For corporate communications, if you're part of any government area, you've got there's a national framework for responsible AI use by government, which is agreed to by both Commonwealth and all state and territory governments. And we've seen at the federal level, there's AI transparency statements. So rather than in every single piece of material that you put out, you'd have just somewhere on the website, AI transparency. This is how we use AI as an organisation. Don't go into too much excruciating detail about it because it's not really that relevant. Also, focusing too much on that and you're getting away from the key point, which is, well, who is the person who's been using this? Are they competent in their workflow? And more importantly, do they know what they're doing and are they taking responsibility for what they've produced? And that's the key thing, which is everything's written by a person, really. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's an example of where you need to have internal policies because very much depends on what's being produced and who it's for. So I know there's a big debate in the medical profession at the moment about the use of notes that are recorded in patient diagnosis, and some doctors think it's wonderful, and some think that it's not good because it loses nuance and it doesn't allow them to ask other questions. So yeah, you have to have a policy.
Can I just add something on policies? This is one thing we really see as a very live challenge is knowing exactly where the data is going that you're putting into an engine. And I think, and knowing that the tech folk know exactly what you can use and in what way. I had someone explain to me at a roundtable once that I was hosting that for the social media teams were often the ones that were most naturally using AI, but they were also closer to the personally identifiable information of their customers, and they've described it as being a toddler riding a stallion. So if you think about the information that's bleeding out, just from the policies perspective, that's one that's really big. So I use a couple, and one, that I know that I'll only ever put anything in that's even data related that has different kind of privacy settings, and something that I can it's in the public domain anyway, it doesn't matter. But from a policy perspective, I'm sure all your organisations have them, but it's a really easy way to kind of let things out into the world.
It's funny how we think about authorship now. All of a sudden, there's a degree of automation here. Going back to that opinion piece in a couple of months ago that got enthusiastically memory holed by the Sydney Morning Herald, because it turned out that a pro vice chancellor had used some AI, and when she was writing it, when I was in comms, the number of opinion pieces that I ghost wrote for a director here or a senior leader here, they don't even bloody read them. They just sign off on their name on it. Now all of a sudden this is a problem. Like, what is? Yeah, and it's actually based on her own work. So I think they did it dirty.
Can I just say on the opinion piece stuff, our editorial director, who's very old school, he's also my husband, but and started in the 80s, so old school, and finds his AI thing like a little bit confronting in lots of ways. He's rejecting op-eds written for very senior leaders in business and government because he's like, I'm not doing that person a favour by publishing this. So you've now got the editorial director spiking op-eds written by their comms teams because the quality is just not there. Now, that's a weird place to live. So
he ran lots of mine though. So
well, there you go, you'll find. Yeah. But it happens increasingly now where he's like, you don't want me to run this. Yeah.
No, more of that. That's what we need, more discernment, I think, because there's a flood of content. Be proud to turn things down and be ruthless.
Yeah.
Hi, I work for the AMA, so the getting stuff is the basis of a lot of the things I've worked with, the data I work with as evidence for policy papers which I write. I might also have to write a media release about the same policy paper or about something else. We also publish a magazine, so we interview people about their research. I guess, Eddie, the question to you is, as an old school journalist who, facts matter, at what level, like how can I know at what level even the doctors and the researchers, the AI there, like they might be a new, new sector, it might be wonderful at it. So how confident can I be in that level of information that's accurate? And then how do I further up the chain, different topic, how do I push back on the people around me who say, just throw it, put it through my
Yeah, okay. So the first part of the question, how can you be confident that the information that's coming to you is legit in the age of AI? I guess the only answer to that is it's not perfect, but the old school skills we have, which is it from a peer-reviewed journal paper? Does it check out, is this person who they say they are? Just good old-fashioned news sense really is the best way you're going to get around that. Then when you say people are encouraging you to use AI in your workflows, just throw it through AI depends, it's a simple request, but in workflows, it's really, really complex. So things like if you're going and getting comment from someone, you're interviewing someone internally for a media release, that's really, really vital. When I was working in comms full time, I'd try not to let people email me quotes because you can always tell. You're going to speak to someone and get them talking. Transcribe it automatically, and then you'll have both the audio record plus the automatic text, for example. Those sorts of things.
Sorry, I'm thinking more in terms of we've got this tool now, it should save me all this time, why aren't we using it?
Yeah. You need to think about where the workflows are and where improvements can be found, and maybe where workflows can change entirely, and without getting a really close look, because it's going to be specific, contextually specific to every organisation and every sort of job type. But if it's that communications work, it's good at doing derivative content if you're providing with high quality content yourself to begin with. So say, for example, newsletters that go out and then you have the summary for that goes in there, the top part of the newsletter from the articles. So you can base it on your previous examples as a knowledge base, and you can save time there. So there's definitely workflows that can be built that can be time saving, but can also standardize quality in certain areas. But it's complex. It's an easy question to ask, a really tricky one to answer.
There was a question about what are the risks in the next 3 years. And one of the trends I'm picking up is that, like, we need the quality lens over it at the moment. Are we going to hit a point where, because we're getting the productivity gains and the macro level of the literacy skills dropping off, where we hit a knowledge vacuum and we actually hit a point like the stonemasons where communications people are in such short supply because we're not training the next generation well?
Yes. It's a real thing. Like I see it on a comm side, the skills, and I also think that we came out of COVID where a lot of people who were at various stages of their career became very inwardly focused, and a lot of language was, I don't do Thursdays, I have coffee, and my life got around people's personal experience. Well, I was in Sydney, which is sort of different from Adelaide experience, but people became very inwardly focused. And if you're a comms person, you're looking out into the world. And then those people came out into the world and then crashed into AI. So if you think about those two things together, you're starting to see the skill set within comms people can be very, it's changed than what it was 10 years ago. And I think, for me, I find it quite confronting. Like, I've had people give me documents that have spelt my name incorrectly. And I'm like, oh gosh, all right. So I think the gene of what communications is and making sure that that is alive and well. And I also have conversations with people in government in Canberra about the senior level in government where they'll happily say, that's not right. Where is that? Question, critique, unpick it. There are lots of people coming through where that gene doesn't exist, and it has to be there.
Yeah, and that's why I say you have to be an advocate for yourself and the profession. I think what we've seen, especially with the growth of technology use in communication more generally, is that management tends to view communication as an administrative function rather than a partnership where we're delivering strategic advice to them that they actually listen to. But I think people who work in communication suffer from the same problem that teachers do. You know, everyone went to school, so they think they know all about teaching and how to tell teachers how to do their job. Everyone consumes communication content, and they will talk to you as though you're exactly the same, have the same level of knowledge and understanding as them, and not respect your professional knowledge. And part of that is that we don't push back on it. And we also don't support what we say with enough data, and evaluation and monitoring of the work that we do is much, much more important. And we have the tools to do that, and I don't think that we're using them as effectively as a profession as we should be.
Can I add to that? So I've talked about, we've got a consulting side as well. So I now have clients that send me draft media releases that are AI generated, that are eye-watering. They are eye-watering. And I also have clients in the US who will give us story angles with the AI prompts they've used to generate them. Now, 2 years ago, it would have made me cry. And now I'm like, well, that's the world we live in. And part of the skill that you're providing as a comms person to say, that's just not going to work, or I've rewritten it and this is why, and they're fine. but adapting to the new world and having the confidence. And I think that's what's hard for internal people, because you've got this, matrix of relationships and things that you have to navigate, where if you're paid as an external advisor to say, you may have generated that story idea, it's not going to work here and this is why. But if you're not in a position to be able to give that advice, and as Colette's saying, a strategic function rather than an administrative function, it makes it very tricky. So, but now what I get that's been people, like teachers, everyone can do your job. Literally our clients are saying, look, I've done it. All you need to do is this. So the nuance is, or the skill is saying, we need to change this to make it work here. And they're fine with it, but it's been an adjustment, I can tell you.
I think it's a compounding effect. We're talking earlier about just the NAPLAN results and just poor literacy generally. And when you work in communications, or you've worked in a newsroom or whatever, and you've had it beaten into you about spelling and grammar and less versus fewer and all those lessons that we learned the hard way, then you've changed jobs or whatever, and you forget that there are people walking around earning twice as much as you, and they're functionally illiterate. Like, it's far more common than you'd think. And these people are successful. And so when you ask about will AI make the value of communication skilled professionals go up, yes and no, because if you don't have good foundational literacy, you don't know what you don't know, you can't recognize it. We can see a piece of AI slop, and we've seen you would have seen all kinds of garbage, human written, the full spectrum of it. A lot of people, they just don't see it in the way that we will. So that's, I'm a bit concerned. I don't know the answer. Yeah.
Can I tell you a funny story? We get these media releases via this distribution, and it's got nothing to do with Accenture. I find it hilarious. Anyway, it's sent to our subscriber email address, which is people that manage the subscriptions. That it's addressed to a column that we haven't run for 18 months called Real Politics. It's not even a person, it's a column that doesn't exist. And the whole thing is like, I see it and I'll go, oh, someone sent that to a column to the subscribers where someone's going to... Anyway, that's the sort of stuff that we're seeing now, that you go, how do you find the actual communications pieces in what is a volume of AI aggregated things? So not the content, but also the mechanism.
Yeah, fluency is much more important. Like, we know the way that people read online and on their screens, on small screens, on notebooks and on laptops. So fluency actually becomes much more important. Any grammatical obstacles or glitches or anything that makes people stumble when they're scanning and reading. And that's what one of the skills of a good communicator is that they can take something that's generated badly and make it more fluent. It might contain exactly the same information, but the way that it flows and the way that it connects with the person who's receiving it is much more powerful and stronger. And that is the skill that we have that people don't see, and that we have to tell them. We have to tell them about it.
A former TV news colleague was mentioning to me about how the Seven Network has introduced a new sort of AI template tool to help the journos write scripts. I was wondering if you think that in a world of time-poor journalists, do you think that will drive a decrease in the quality of the work that is coming out?
We shouldn't automatically assume that this will result in lower quality, just because we've seen so many people do it before with disaster results because they perhaps weren't expert to begin with. If it's based on training data set of 20 years worth of TV scripts in a house style that's set with a style guide, and it's built well, it could be quite successful. Or if you are doing a rush job, like when a certain university person had to do a video at the last minute that he forgot about and just threw some stuff through ChatGPT, I'm like, negative parallelisms, it's not this, it's that, everything in rules of three, and I'm halfway through recording this thing, I'm like, oh shit, this is terrible. Because those sorts of things. But I wouldn't necessarily, I wouldn't automatically say that those sorts of projects are doomed to fail. Do we really want to be handwriting or manually writing every piece of script? Good journalists can do a lot of that on the fly when they're doing live cross and stuff. But I'd say that's a good thing to explore.
Particularly if it's freeing up that news journalist to do other things. Like to me, that sounds like workflow. And I think the nature of news, TV news is so finite. You've got this many seconds, you've got to get it across, it's this, it's that. That's workflow. And if it's helping you actually understand the story better as opposed to the admin, then I think that's where there are good workflow work cases.
Yeah, and anything that can be formularised, and news stories can, is AI's useful for. But I tend to see that what AI produces for us, there's a whole lot of other things that it does in the world, but for us, is a first draft. And that's when you then bring creativity, you bring experience, you bring understanding of your organisation, you bring thoughts about how is this going to be received by the stakeholder. And having got that first draft, I think should give you more time and more scope to do that finessing of the content that you produce.
I don't have a good view, because if you think about what we recruit for, it's so specific and so specialised. It's so much so that the person has to be interested in policy, technology, they're willing to be in Canberra. So I don't have a good view. I do worry about bias put into those sorts of processes. And I think a lot of the things you'll see on LinkedIn are people of a certain age or who feel like they've been discounted before they've even got an interview. So I think the bias things that we're talking about are very real in the recruitment sector. I'm in our industry, I think we're probably a bit more old school in terms of finding the right people. So apart from the bias piece, I don't have a lot to add.
I think HR is an example, and recruitment is an example of where sometimes when a technology comes along, there's a reversal. So because of the effects that it has. And Google is an example of this. A few years ago, they changed their own recruitment practices because they were getting all these wonderful resumes from top achieving engineers, software people, and then they couldn't work with them because some of them were egomaniacs, some of them were psychopaths, whatever. And so they changed it so that they gave them actual scenarios to work with, and they paid them for the day or 2 days or whatever they were there, and based their selection on practical connection with them. And so these are the things we don't know about the technology, the unintended consequences, and that's why you have to keep up with things, because you have to see them as they're emerging.
I'm a passionate advocate. I put AI into everything with several clear warning no-go zones, and that's decision-making processes that affect a person or persons. So job recruitment is one, and I'm saying no, and just slow down. Awards, promotions, where panels come together and assess candidates on their merits. You got to be really, really careful. But more than that, there's job advertisements, and I applied for a fellowship where I had to do an AI interview, which was insufferable, just this animated and then answer questions on the fly. I'm not sure if that's going to really take off, but there are anecdotal examples of software that is looking not just at transcribing your answers to the interview questions, but also looking at your facial expression, your prosody, your speech, and all those things. And there will be areas and jurisdictions where industries and particular roles are algorithmically managed in really, really bad ways. I mean, what are you seeing that? Particularly like warehouses, like Amazon warehouses is certainly one. It's certainly a tricky area.
They applied for a job at Woolies or something.
Yep.
They had to speak to a bot and they got hooked into them.
Yeah.
And they worked in Woolies before. It's like, anyway.
Yeah, that's going to be a tricky area, and it'll be one that there'll be some particular case studies that'll scandalise through the news, and then it'll be regulated, I think. Yeah.
We're almost at time, so one last question. I know you've had your hand up.
Hi. My question was more just around controlling the narrative. So you mentioned, the different AI bots and GPTs and stuff that are out there, but picking one and doing it well. So how do you, I guess, knowing that when you're writing your comms or marketing outputs, that an AI engine is going to be reading it probably almost first, how do you control that narrative still displaying, I guess, that trust and transparency piece, and not what you want to get across actually gets through your engine.
I probably don't see things through quite the same tech lens, but I would say consistency would be one thing. Consistency of across multiple channels and the message and different ways of going back to kind of the one message and lots of different executions of that. And we've kind of talked a bit before, and I don't have expertise in the actual way that the LLMs work, etc. But authenticity in terms of rich voices, examples, real people, things that stick out. That would be my advice if I was looking at that messaging framework that over a period of time is building a body of work. And I think the example that I gave about the multinational and their penetration, I mean, they did that very effectively through a combination of their own website, messaging, government briefing documents, probably analyst briefings, and media releases and earned media. So that would be a good example.
But yeah, similar to that, it's probably more omni-channel in that you need the earned media, you need your own media, so your own website, your own proactive comms in that regard. But it needs to be across a far greater spectrum of social media, Reddit, all those sorts of things. And there's variation across the different products. So things like ChatGPT searches more on Wikipedia, for example. Google overview, search overviews really hit LinkedIn hard. So you can kind of cheat your way there for a while until it moves on. Reddit as well picks up quite a lot. So it's still too early. So there's too much volatility other than it needs to be across channels and mediums. So you've got to be probably producing across more channels, not necessarily more content, but across a greater spectrum of places.
From a technical perspective, this is something that we studied a lot in product development. So this shift is that for a long time, everyone's been quite specific about channels. So having an individual channel strategy, meeting an audience where they are in terms of a particular channel. It is much more that what has been said around that master narrative needs to be everywhere and consistent, because what a model is going to do is take multiple sources that agree with each other to form its point. They do all work slightly differently and are informed differently. So also ensuring that you've got a way to understand what those differences are, particularly in terms of citation, in terms of how a model might characterize you, but it is very much master narrative everywhere. It's also being able to have a solid amount of third-party voices that echo that narrative as well, because it will ultimately check for that first. How far and wide is this, and how corroborated is it by other sources that I think are relevant, is really, really how to keep that narrative strong. Okay, I think we are very much to time or over time, but please join me in thanking our wonderful panelists. We do have a QR code around the room, and I'll put it up on the slide shortly, of a little pack of information. That's a little bit of an extension to this conversation if you would like to know any more. But yeah, it was lovely to see all of you, and thank you for showing up today.